Welcome to the stream. I'm Mike. This is a World Affairs Council presentation. World Affairs Council of Greater Reading is the leading educational organization promoting understanding and enlightenment on global issues. Great presentation today. Really looking forward to it. I feel like it's been a while, maybe close to a month since we've had our last presentation. The last one was a big one, global warming. You'll notice that we are doing things a little bit differently today. We're using the Zoom webinar software for the live presentation here that our members are joining. So we're not seeing each other in the cameras. No need to worry about hiding yourself if you're having lunch today. So go ahead, eat up. Everybody is muted. We're going to have live Q&A at the end, so make sure you use the chat functionality just like always. I think everybody's familiar with that to be able to ask questions of our presenter towards the end. Otherwise, we'll follow pretty much a similar routine. So no need to worry about keeping yourselves muted. That's all taken care of. We got some new software today. And with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to David for our introductions.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome everyone. Today we welcome back to the World Affairs Council Professor Nick Eftimiades, who is an assistant teaching professor at Penn State University, Harrisburg's School of Public Affairs and Homeland Security. Nick actually presented to us several years ago, and he is back today with much acclaim. Nick's topic today is Chinese intelligence operations, comparative analysis of operations and tactics in economic espionage. Nick recently retired from the U.S. Department of Defense. His 34-year government career included working at the CIA, the State Department, the Diplomatic Security Service, and Defense Intelligence Agency. His career included overseas postings in Moscow, Frankfurt, London, and Tokyo. Nick's more notable assignments include Chief of DIA's Counterterrorism Operations, Senior Technical Officer of the Future Technology Division, and Chief of DIA's Space Division. He served as DIA's lead for national space policy and strategy development. He has authored books and scholarly articles on national security threats, emerging technologies, and space security issues. His book, Chinese Intelligence Operations, is an examination of the structure, operations, and methodology of the intelligence services of the People's Republic. The book received worldwide recognition, with the Chinese government declaring Nick an enemy of the people. With that, welcome, Nick.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna appreciate the introduction, and I thank you very much for having me back. I am going to jump into a presentation I have. I've been working on Chinese intelligence for the last 30 years or so. Did part of my undergraduate and graduate work in China and Taiwan. Got my degrees in East Asian studies. So I've been in this realm working on specifically commercial and economic espionage from China since the early 1990s, testified before Congress, etc. As I speak today, I don't speak on behalf of Penn State University. I need to make that clear. And also the fact I'm on a number of government advisory boards with the Defense Department and Homeland Security, and I don't represent those entities either. So with that, let's jump in. I know we're gonna have questions, and we'll save that towards the end. I'll try and get through this. It's a large amount of material, so I'm gonna move somewhat quickly, and hopefully we'll all learn a bit and be able to understand espionage as it relates to China and commercial espionage, and the implications for the United States, right? Because if there's no impact or no implications, why do we even care? So let's look at this. As we look, the first category we're going to discuss are definitions and categories of espionage. And I'll go into that. That's actually important. And it's just apples to apples. So we're all, when I say things like espionage, we all have an understanding of exactly what I'm talking about, right? Same understanding across the board. Because there are legal definitions, there's media definitions, things like that. So after that, we'll look at China's actual espionage organizations. We'll look at the traditional collection apparatus that they have, as well as some of the non-traditional collectors. In fact, that's the intelligence community terminology for it, non-traditional collectors. So we'll look at some of them, who they are, how they work, what they do, and what their objectives are. That'll actually lead us into China's strategic collection objectives. Why do we see this happening? What does China hope to acquire? What does it hope to gain out of this, militarily, economically, socially, etc.? What are the strategic collections objectives of the People's Republic of China, and how does that translate into actually on-the-ground espionage, and in this case, commercial espionage operations? And once we have an understanding of exactly what they're looking for and why, we'll move into comparative analysis of commercial espionage cases. So we'll take just a few cases from two large bins, aerospace technology and information technology. In each of those categories, there are over 100 cases. And we'll take a look at just a couple of them and do a compare and contrast on exactly what those cases are and what, and the types of techniques. We have a term for this. It's called tradecraft. The type of espionage techniques that are used to collect against each one of these target sets in the United States. And then lastly, we'll just sum up with a couple of words on the impact. Again, what does it mean? Actually, I'll give you a little, what does it mean for Pennsylvania? Because, you look at this as a world affair. Oh, well, it's on the other side of the world. It's China. It's a big nation thing. No, it's actually had very, very dramatic effects, just for the state of Pennsylvania alone, not the least of which is on the steel industry. And that has translated to, China's activities translated to millions of jobs in the United States. And we'll take a look at that in a little bit more depth. Okay, so let's jump in. Categories of espionage. If you talk to someone in the FBI or CIA or something, and you say espionage, they think, well, the law enforcement community thinks 18 U.S.C. 798, the U.S. Code 798, or 790, that whole series of laws or in the U.S. Code relate to espionage, people stealing secret classified material, meaning material that the U.S. government has restricted in dissemination and actions there. That is one espionage, okay? And as you look before you, there are many other things that we look at and roll into that category in the media as espionage. And all these are categories that the Chinese intelligence service is working to collect, or working against. So it's not just secrets that they're after, but they're also doing things like what we call covert action, which again, the United States sees this as a Foreign Agents Registration Act violation, meaning a person is working on behalf of a foreign power in a covert capacity. Right? They're working in a covert capacity on behalf of this power, keeping that relationship secret, doing actions on behalf of that foreign government. Now, that could be related to actions against the U.S. government and secrets, but it could also be stealing things in the economy. It could also be stealing from a university. The fact is that they could also be putting forth propaganda. The fact is they're acting in a covert action on behalf of a foreign government. The reason I call that covert action as opposed to just the actual U.S. law, Foreign Agents Registration Act, has to do with databasing information. I have, and what you are going to look at are the results of analysis of over 600 cases in this, quote, categories of espionage. Those cases are worldwide. I have cataloged every one of them and taking years to do so. I have them in a database and am able to, tell you data, everyone from the person's age, from when they conducted that violation, what their academic degree was, what their methods, their espionage tradecraft was, what the worth value of the product that they stole was, things like that. Who else was involved. So when you pull data like that together, you have to have some sort of common terms. Covert action, the Federal Foreign Agents Registration Act is not used worldwide, right? That's just US. But the bin of covert action covers all that type of activity, working covertly on behalf of a foreign government, wherever that is done. Okay, economic espionage. In the United States, as you see, that means the Espionage Act of 1996, two components to that. But overall, in a bigger sense, working towards collecting information that benefits a foreign government economically, and knowing that that's illegal, is including trade secrets and intellectual property, is put under that category of economic espionage. Illegal exports. There are a number of violations In the United States, the International Traffic and Arms Regulations for military technology, Department of Commerce's Export Administration Regulations. There are, that's dual use technology. There are also a couple of other U.S. Export laws, IEPA, EXIA, and such, which deal with illegal exports of technology from the United States, right? So we have a bin of illegal exports that we see China very, very aggressively acting in hundreds of cases to steal U.S. technology. Research violations. We've actually just started to hear of research violations, and we'll talk a little about that. Things like the 1,000 Talents program. You've actually heard of one of 500 different types of programs in China. More than 500 are put under the 1,000 Talents program to advance China technologically. Now, sometimes that includes doing it illegally as far as U.S. law is concerned. Not reporting things on taxes, conducting wire fraud, things like that. Sometimes it's not. It's straight out in the open. But there's this category that is routinely used for the collection, covert or not, of foreign knowledge, foreign technology, and foreign research, and that falls under research violations, right? We'll talk about just the specific illegal ones of those. And last and certainly not, in 2016, the U.S. Congress passed the Defend Trade Secrets Act, to give companies a civil remedy towards the theft of their technology. And some of these cases on after them in a civil capacity. So we'll look at some of those. Okay, let's talk a little about espionage organizations. In China, let's start with, just like we have, China has, and every major country has some type of overt document collection capability. And when we say document, we mean obviously electronic media. China has a fairly extensive one, in fact, far greater than that which we have in the United States, and we have a pretty massive apparatus, as you can imagine, worldwide. I'll draw your attention to a couple of entities here. On the right, you see the Institute of Scientific and Technical Information of China, a organization that just specifically collects all the open source data that could be available on U.S. technology. Okay, in the center right, the China Defense Science and Technology Information Center and the Beijing Document Center. That is specifically military technology, military science and technology related. And of course, most of that, I wouldn't say all, but most of that is complete open information, or what they call gray literature, right? So it might be company internal documents, company magazines, that type of thing, databases and information that's picked up from universities, that type that isn't published, but they can get access to through the dark web or the World Wide Web, right? So we have a massive collection of billions of pieces of bits of information within that entity. And that is sort of a key one for China's defense industry. Next to that, you see the Patent Documentation Library, which I thought was hysterical. At one point, I saw their website, and they were literally bragging on their website how they can assist you. I mean, this is in Chinese, talking to the Chinese market, the Chinese civil market, and how they can assist the civil market in breaking foreign patents, and how they're experts in it, and they can assist you in breaking foreign patents. Which is, done by companies and organizations legally going to break foreign patents, but this is a government entity bragging about how it can assist companies in doing that. Okay, one of the things I'll just get off the statement on this slide is to think about the applications of all this information along with artificial intelligence. Okay, when you have billions of bits of information, and massive data pools on individuals through LinkedIn, through these document centers, through China's national technology transfer centers at the federal level, 453 centers for transferring technology. When you use things like artificial intelligence to bridge the gap and to make sense of all these data, it really becomes an extraordinarily powerful capability. Okay, traditional collectors. This is a traditional espionage that we all know and love. It is China's premier civil intelligence service is the Ministry of State Security. It conducts cyber operations, and actually most of the actions that we've seen out of those cyber operations are contractor groups to the Ministry of State Security. And this really happened around 2015 or so. There was a transfer in that operational activity from the People's Liberation Army to the Ministry of State Security. One thing that went with the very, very large defense reorganization that China started in 2015. So they conduct cyber operations out of the Ministry of State Security, contractor force. They also conduct human operations. That's human operations in China against foreign entities and worldwide. Ministry of Public Security. Ministry of Public Security also conducts human intelligence, also conducts human intelligence collection operations. That's the spy versus spy that you see. They are also primarily the ones responsible for the Great Firewall of China, for protecting China, and for the censorship activities that occur internally throughout China. They have a protective intelligence unit, which does their human operations, and there are two components of their human activity as of late. The dissidents, which the Ministry of Public Security collects against, and by dissidents we mean religious organizations, entities, or non-ethnic, non-Han Chinese. The Uyghurs, for example, they lead collection efforts against minority populations, Uyghurs and Tibetans. One of the interesting components of this organization started in 2015, but we've actually just seen it manifest itself, like literally in the last few months, where it's taken over responsibility for intelligence, and we call this, some protective intelligence or support intelligence for overseas force support, force collection operations for supporting forces overseas. So China has a massive Belt and Road Initiative worth $2 trillion overseas in countries all over to protect Chinese citizens overseas, to protect those projects from sabotage and from terrorism, because there's a lot of resistance to them. They actually have the Ministry of Public Security leads in that effort using Chinese companies, Chinese private security companies, PSCs as they're called. And that's a new development, very new development, because it actually puts information into state agencies as opposed to the Chinese Communist Party. Okay. Central Military Commission, an entity of the Chinese Communist Party. They have a joint staff department, Joint Intelligence Bureau. This was formed out of a previous J2 element of military intelligence department. Again, in 2015, they conduct overt and clandestine human intelligence, meaning their attachés overseas and military attachés openly collect information. Nothing wrong with that. Every attaché does it. But they also have a clandestine human collection function and capability, and they do particularly against military forces, capabilities, technology. The Central Military Commission also has a newly formed, again, 2015-16 Strategic Support Force. In some senses, they were way ahead of us. They took their cyber collection elements in the military, and they took their space systems, which give them their overhead imaging capabilities and collection of communications capabilities, and they put those together in one organization. And they have some overlapping functions. The cyber activities that are done for protection as well as collection are done under that entity, and the space systems, which collect information from imaging and signals intelligence, are also done out of that one entity that reports to the Central Military Commission. Last and certainly not least is the United Front Work Department. The United Front Work Department has a very long history in Chinese politics, bonding with other organizations worldwide to advance the interest of the Chinese nation. That's what their concept is for United Front Work. So, and they execute this through friendly commissions and associations that try and spread the culture and knowledge of China. And in fact, they work as influence operations to support, and they are physically under the United, and you see that actually on their websites. They're actually under, these associations are under the United Front Work Department. And in that sense, they conduct conduct influence operations all over the world, including the United States, but they also have a human collection component of it because they also work in these operations against dissidents, against foreign dissidents. So example, in New York City recently, several months ago, a New York City police officer was arrested for collecting information against the local Tibetan population when the Tibetans, have a free Tibet movement. And he was collecting information and passing that off to the Chinese consulate in New York in a covert relationship, or in a clandestine relationship, rather. Those case officers, as they're called, those people who ran him as an intelligence asset, were from the United Front Work Department, because they were working specifically against dissidents and working to influence or try and stop the influence of dissident organizations overseas. We've even seen this in some extensively with Zoom very recently. So non-traditional collectors. Now, this is where we get into a world that that U.S. and other intelligence agencies of the West aren't as comfortable. And it is because they're not designed to really contend with these non-traditional collectors. Our intelligence apparatus is combined to throw a blanket over our secrets and to jump on top of the secrets and to protect our secrets, our military defense, diplomatic and policy secrets that exist in the United States government. They're really not, they're just now in the past couple of years starting to contend with this whole commercial espionage component in a big way, which in the case of China and the United States, the commercial espionage activity far out, dwarfs their traditional espionage operations. So let's take a look at some of the non-traditional collectors of China. You have state-owned enterprises. Well, state-owned enterprises are exactly what they sound like. They are enterprises, industries that are at least 51% owned by the state. And in the case of China, there were 150,000 of them. May sound like a lot, but 20 years ago, there were 300,000. China has consolidated and tried to shed itself of these very ineffective state-owned enterprises and trying to modernize so that they can compete globally. So of those 150,000 state-owned enterprises, 50,000 of them are under the central government, and they are specifically managed by two entities. The State Assets Supervision and Administration Commission actually does the management of those organizations, and the CCP Organization Department, that's the Chinese Communist Party Organization Department, which is probably the largest personnel office anywhere in the world. And it assigns the leadership to those organizations, which people need to be party members. It monitors and controls those organizations through party committees placed in those organizations, which those organizations must have. Same thing with private companies in China, that they must have those party committees. And those are specifically so the party apparatus, the organization department, and the Assets and Supervision Commission can control those entities, right? They are used as collection functions. We'll go into that in some depth in a minute. Private company.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
We do have a request from the chat. If you could possibly just slow your speaking down a little bit. People are having a little hard time keep up with this dense information.
Yes, I can. I'll also encourage you to put your seatbacks and tray tables in their upright positions as we move forward.
I got you.
Yes, I will try. So private companies are also used in collecting information, obviously, specifically, mostly on the economic front, commercial intelligence, trade secrets information, and there are individual entrepreneurs doing this as well. Another of the non-traditional collectors falls under the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, and that entity is the State Administration for Science and Technology and Industry for National Defense, SASTIN. That actually changed names several years ago to this current name, SASTIN. And what this specific entity does under the ministry, right? So this is on the government side. We have, Chinese Communist Party doing some collection activities. We have military, we have state agencies. This is under the ministry, which is, the function where all the state agencies are under the Ministry of Information, Industry and Information Technology, right? They're all under the State Council. This is one of those ministries. And it has responsibilities for detailing out and managing military production. Okay, this specific entity manages the military production done by the state-owned enterprises and done by companies for the military, the People's Liberation Army of China. Okay, so we have this entity under the a ministry that manages defense production. It has direct supervision over 7 universities and contracts for research with an additional 55 other universities. They conduct and dozens, if not hundreds, of research institutes under the state-owned enterprises, right? Remember I talked about those 50,000 state-owned enterprises? Well, about 112 of them are state entities that are, I'm sorry, 112 of those are considered critical to China's national and economic security, right? And that's what they say. Identify 112 of those that are critical to that. This organization contracts them all for research. In the case of the 7 universities I mentioned, which are the 7 sons of China's defense, they have classified facilities where they conduct that type of research and also support, in other ways, support the development of military technology. Okay, military and some intelligence work. This entity, the state administration, also assigns collection requirements to the People's Liberation Army and the Ministry of State Security. Goes to a party collection chain, but you can't just tell an intelligence agency go out and collect information. You have to tell them what to collect. So in the case of in the case of military-related technologies, things related to military production, this entity actually produces the lists of go out and collect this or collect that, right? That's what we need. And the reason they're able to do that is because they're in touch with all the military production elements in China and in touch with the research elements in universities. So they can say, we need to know this. We still don't know it. Our universities haven't been able to figure it out. Our military production, system needs it. So let's go task the MSS and the PLA for it. There are actually 2 separate offices in this organization that do not only that tasking, which is the strategic planning department, which does that type of tasking and organizing how the information is going to be collected, but they also have a collection component as well, which is the international affairs department. And those folks actually go out typically with scientific delegations when they're going to meet other countries, and they typically go out and covertly collect technology as well. Okay, so 2 offices within that organization that actually are aggressively involved in the intelligence collection against technology. Okay, I mentioned before the 7 sons of national defense. These are those universities. What's interesting is I think everyone, if not everyone, then just about every one of these has been identified in FBI criminal complaints for theft of U.S. technology or in DHS ITAR, right, International Traffic in Arms Regulations, criminal cases as being the back end, as being the body that receives that information that were, and it's either through their professors or through front companies, but these companies have, just about all of them, if not all of them, have been identified as colluding in the theft of U.S. technology, mostly focused on actually exclusively focused on military technology. Some commercial like space shuttle. Okay, we've seen a little about the entities that are involved in collecting that technology. Let's take a look at China's strategic collection objectives. How do they decide what are we collecting? Well, it's a lot different from the U.S. and very, very specifically because it is so heavily focused on science and technology. So I won't go through the process rather at length, but there is a process that emanates within the working groups of the Chinese Communist Party to ultimately, through the bureaucracy, and getting to produce a lot of seminal documents that define China's technology requirements out for the decades to come. As you look at the one on the right, Made in China 2025, that's a very, very good example of how China defines its strategic collection objectives. Again, this is all related to commercial technologies, right? Military technologies, not those traditional espionage secrets we've spoken about. So when we look at those technologies, commercial technologies that China's after, Made in China 2025, their national industrial plan, based actually on the German industrial plan, is the first one that comes to mind. We'll look at that in a little bit of depth. Well, China decides its strategic technology collection objectives. It has a number of research programs, and what you're seeing now is just the output from those programs, right? All the projects that they develop at the national level as a result of their working groups to decide what type of technologies China needs to advance in the future. It needs to advance commercially as well as militarily, right? So they have a number of major S&T projects that develop out of this requirements deck, as it would be called. They do have a budgeting process, as you can imagine, the same things that you've seen appear on the bottom: Earth observation technologies, nanotechnologies, endangered ecosystems, all those types of technologies, advanced rail traffic, new energy vehicles. All these types of technologies are budgeted against, and a 5-year plan, and we've just seen the most recent 5-year plan meet, 14th 5-year plan, to outline a budget for the next 5 years to collect against these technologies. And I don't mean collect, I mean develop and collect. Now, when you take all those technologies and line them up against the theft that we know has occurred, you get something that looks like this. And this chart was originally from the DNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And what I did is I just went in and highlighted the areas that we had a number of cases of China's commercial espionage against these types of technologies. And as you look, this fairly well fits aggressively with what we've seen on the previous charts, right? Marine systems, space infrastructure and exploration technology. We saw hybrid electric cars, right? We saw solar energy technology just on the previous charts. So what this actually shows us is a national level decision. We need to develop these technologies, and then that trickles down to not only the research and development investments, but also trickles down to the state-owned enterprises, the universities, and the intelligence services to go out and collect these technologies. So hence, this is what we call an all-of-society approach to conducting espionage. And that's the US is only now just starting to get used to this, because we still don't have the legal infrastructure in place to try and address this. The investigative authorities are still lacking a bit. So there's a lot of law that needs to be passed. There's a lot of change in investigative focus that really needs to be done in order to address this threat. And in the meantime, I'll tell you that China has over the years collected trillions, not billions, but trillions of dollars in US technology. If we take a little more in-depth look at Made in China 2025, these are the cases that line up against the numbers of cases that line up against Made in China 2025. And we're just going to look at 2 of these, information technology and aerospace and aeronautical equipment. If I look at Chinese espionage cases as a whole, this is what you get. You look at Pennsylvania has 17 cases, and you can see across the country, under the categories that I gave you, these are all the cases that I was able to discover, the numbers. All right, last part, we'll look at the analysis of cases. We talked a bit about espionage tradecraft. I mentioned that name, that term. What you're looking at is a chart here that as you divide up the types of espionage tradecraft, things that just sort of start fitting together. In some cases, standard encryption was used, commercial encryption, along with meetings in China, as you see in the first category. In the last category, on the far right, we had a lot more tradecraft applied, tailor-made devices or techniques, third country meetings, to avoid the FBI, meet in Germany or someplace like that, or Belgium, and using cutouts, meaning front individuals, organizations, accommodation addresses, those types of things for transmitting information, added security layers that are put in to conduct espionage activities. And what you see on the left is a legend of the numbers of cases and how they are actually, and how many of each. So you can we'll just look at the state-owned enterprises across, and you'll see that that 24 of those cases that they used encryption and standard hiding techniques and met in China to avoid detection. The next category, in 56 cases, they used false names or documents. That's largely because of the export violations, which all the documentation filed was fraudulent. After that, you see no tradecraft used at all, open communications and names. And then to the right, a very, very small number of cases that you would imagine, because it's a state-owned enterprise, it's not an intel agency, but a very, very small number of cases that actually use third country meetings and, and tailor-made encryption devices or things like that. What's very interesting, and I'll just say this lastly on this chart, is the Ministry of State Security, the bottom block across, where you see 22 cases on the far right are tailor-made devices. That makes sense. On the far left, 29 cases had standard China meetings and things like that, standard commercial encryption, stuff like that. And that makes sense because they're an intelligence agency, but 23 cases have no tradecraft and open comms, which is absurd for an intelligence agency. And the fact that all these different categories are acted on by the same intelligence agency leaves us questions as to agency, what type of training do they have, standardization, quality control in their operations, things like that. Okay, looking at just a couple of the cases, and I'm actually just going to cover a couple here because of the time. Sun Wei, which started in late 2018, a Raytheon missile systems engineer out of Arizona. He had worked for Raytheon for 10 years, 48 years of age. What he gave up to China was field programmable gate arrays for ballistic missile defense, advanced medium air range missile systems, Stinger, and the kinetic kill vehicle programs, RKV programs. He took the company laptop to China. He accessed the Raytheon server while outside of China. This is something we're starting to see a lot more lately, accessing company servers either outside the US or in a way that's unjustified. He sent his resignation letter to Raytheon while he was in China, but actually he had lied to the Raytheon security staff. He told them initially he wasn't going to China, was going to the Philippines and elsewhere in Southeast Asia, but he got caught up in that lie. And when ultimately his downloads were looked at while he accessed outside the country, as well as what he had on his laptop, it went to be a violation of 5 counts of the ITAR. And if memory serves correct, just in the past few weeks, he was actually convicted of these. Kathy Chen, a 2015 case, was an accountant for aerospace companies. She had her own set of companies, and she conducted export violations, sending technology illegally to China via Hong Kong. That involved advanced radar systems, military-grade communications jammers, Ka-band space communications, etc. She was a little crafty and used multiple aliases, false passport, disposable cell phones, etc., to communicate with her Chinese contacts. Aerospace, you're just looking at the highlighted areas. The talent recruitment programs are used to collect in Europe, not really in the United States. We've only had 2 that actually use the talent recruitment programs to collect aerospace technologies. Non-traditional collectors are a big collection mode for aerospace technologies. Cyber operations, big collection process. Use of front companies and the intelligence services, all are used to collect aerospace technologies illegally in the US. Just a category of the numbers of breakdowns that you see in the actual collection, the most prominent of which is the ITAR, the International Traffic and Arms Regulations, and economic espionage cases. Those 2 are the main in collecting aerospace technologies, the main types of violations that are accessed. Lastly on this is a customer, the PRC customer view. If you take all those aerospace cases and look at the back end of who was receiving the data, 41% of the time it was the People's Liberation Army, 28% the state-owned enterprises, 13% were universities or other institutes, and 15% was the Ministry of State Security. So, summary, just a list of what names were used, how many numbers used, which cases used no tradecraft at all, etc. Okay, the important thing here is that the most targeted entities were small private US companies. The big companies, the Raytheons, the Boeings and stuff, tend to have security systems in place to be able to protect themselves. It's the smaller ones that really didn't. Okay, we'll just do one case of the information technology espionage cases, and that was a case that was recently settled, Beaumont. And Baumau was an assistant professor at Xiamen University, a fact he hid. He was a visiting professor at University of Texas. He stole through subterfuge in working with CNEX Labs. He was actually working on behalf of Huawei, got them to give a solid state drive open channel technology. And instead of just reviewing it and publishing research results that he had agreed to, he was actually funded on the back end by Huawei, and and passed that information along to Huawei so that they could reproduce that device. Okay, differing from the aerospace collection, you see the use of non-traditional collectors for this, foreign acquisitions, again, front companies, academic collaboration, which is generally overt, and intelligence services. So you look at the difference between this and the previous slide and what mechanisms the PRC is using to collect this information. Okay, like our other slide, but this has dramatic differences. If you take a look at the at private companies, now instead of being 3%, they're at 22%, which is a huge difference. PRC, or rather, PRC other as well, the PRC universities were also a very low percent in aerospace technology, or a medium percent in aerospace technology. Here it's much higher. Same thing with state-owned enterprises, much higher. PLA, we had 41% last time. Here it's 8%. So different mechanisms are used to focus on different foreign technologies. Okay, the tradecraft employed in these cases, I won't go through that, but it's you'll see that there are differences in the numbers that are cases, the two largest categories being the false names and the no tradecraft open and just straight theft of data. Okay, just a summary chart for your information, the same thing you've just already seen. 44% use no tradecraft at all, 43 cases use false names and third parties. The most targeted entities here, in contrast to the other one, which were small companies to collect technologies, aerospace technologies, the number one targeted entities were large private US companies, okay, followed by universities. Okay, so what do we care? Why do we care at all for this? Well, there are three reasons. There's the national economy and economic security. There is our own national security and our ability to govern, our governance. In the case of the economy, again, if you have, which is what we do, have trillions of dollars worth of intellectual property theft that have occurred over the years. We have fake intellectual property theft and fake items coming into the US. 87% of fake products, that compete with US products, 87% of them come from China. In the case of Canada, it's 80%. In the case of all of Europe, it's 82%. All those fake products come from China, and they're all a result of intellectual property theft. So dramatic effects on the U.S. economy. The steel manufacturing techniques, which were stolen by China, and then China's unfair trade practices of dumping steel in the U.S. literally crushed the steel economy of Pennsylvania. Same thing is true for solar panels industry, and the same thing is true for wind turbine industry, right? China has just literally stolen those industries. And it all started with intellectual property theft, and then a coordinated fashion of trade, of trade practices, illegal trade practices. The second is national security. The PLA has developed, and the People's Liberation Army has developed more naval vessels in the past few years than the United States did in World War II. This is the biggest ramp up in fact, now it is the largest Navy in the world. It is the biggest ramp up of military capabilities, and in some cases, well advanced of ours, including the areas of hypersonics. They've moved out aggressively in their national security world and their military world. In fact, they've taken over the South China Sea, as you've seen from 2012 onward, in a period of a few short years. They militarized islands, made military bases throughout the South China Sea, and claimed that entire sea, which has 90% of world shipping passes through at some point, which claimed that entire sea as theirs. So what's that mean for international shipping? Well, it's actually pretty threatening for international shipping, and the fact of the matter is that they have developed the military capabilities now to defend that. They certainly rival the United States, and particularly within their own, within those water areas of Southeast Asia. So it changes the balance of power globally, which has to do with governance in the United States and globally. As China changes the balance of power through economic theft and through military growth and use, aggression with it, it has an impact on global governance, and which is basically derailing the world's standards, the world's rule of order, to one that is favorable to the PRC. And in fact, they've said this is their intention. They have made nothing unclear about that. They've been very, very clear that the global world order, the rules-based order that we have currently, does not suit China, and that must change. They have said this publicly. Xi Jinping said it publicly dozens of occasions. He's written on this, that their system is better and the world must change to accommodate their system, because their system is better than the current rule of order that we have. So it's a challenge. It's an extraordinary challenge, not only for the United States, but for the world that's up and coming. Okay, that being the case, that finishes everything that I have. Sorry, I ran a bit over, even though I didn't intend to, but hopefully not by too much. And I'm happy to take questions.
Awesome. That was a great presentation, Nick. Covered a lot of information. We've had some feedback in the chat that I'll share when we come back for Q&A. Let me just make a quick announcement. We did fill up the room, so the recording will be made available to everyone. Hopefully you're seeing this in the recording. If you weren't able to get in today, we had a couple people on Facebook Live too. So our most attended presentation that we've had yet. And I am going to take a moment to bring Saul up just to give us a few quick announcements, and then we'll come back for some live Q&A. Is that all right, Nick?
Absolutely.
All right. We'll see you again soon.
Sure.
Okay, well, thank you also, Nick. We really do appreciate you sharing with us. As Mike indicated earlier, your second time with us, and very, very, very much appreciated. Upcoming, folks, if you would like to join us, Thursday, January 28th at 4 p.m., not a traditional time for us, it's a Thursday, but we have Dr. Lee Lukoff, Israeli Politics, the State of U.S.-Israeli Relations, and the Recent Peace Accords. This presentation is co-sponsored by the Jewish Federation of Reading. Dr. Lukoff teaches at the University of Georgia's Washington semester program and in the Department of Government at American University. His research interests include American foreign policy, intelligence studies, U.S.-Israeli relations, Middle East politics, and political psychology. Then in February, at our traditional Wednesday noontime, February 10, we are pleased to have a presentation to us from John Walsh on the topic, the future of energy. John Walsh is a director and president of chief executive officer of UGI Corporation. UGI Corporation is a Fortune 500 company. Mr. Walsh is incidentally a past president of the Philadelphia of the board of directors. He is going to present to us, and of local interest for us, two of the subsidiary companies, UGI Energy and UGI Utilities, as many of you know, are located right here in our general area. UGI Energy here in Reading and UGI Utilities in Denver, over in Lancaster County. Mr. Walsh he will address the direction and form and distribution of energy today and project into the future here in the United States and worldwide. And again, they're a Fortune 500 company with an extensive footprint, not only here in the United States, but throughout much of Europe. So those are good upcoming programs. And as always, we want to encourage you, if you'd like to learn more about us, go to our website at www.wacreading.org, www.wacreading.org. You can learn more about the ways the council benefits members, students, and the larger community. And if you're not a member and would like to become one, go to our this address, contact us, as you'll see on the website, contact us at wacreading.org, or call us at 610-375-7880. Again, the key is to go to our website for further information. Again, Nick, thank you very much.
very welcome.
All right, thanks all. We have had a ton of questions come in. I'm trying to keep up with them as best I can. Let me just kind of answer first. There were some minor issues with the stream. I apologize for that. This is our first time with the webinar software, using this presentation software. We had a little security notice. We had a little bit of fuzziness with the slides. We'll get all that sorted out for next time. Thanks for sticking with us. Great presentation that I think offsets a lot of that. So yes, the recording of the presentation will be made available. I'll send that out to everyone tomorrow. We did fill up the room, so likely some people were turned away. We'll take care of that for next time and get those people the recording. It's great turnout. I appreciate everybody coming in today. And then the other thing I would note, now I don't want to put you on the spot, Nick, but we had a couple people ask if you'd be willing to share the slides. And here's a question from Robert about if he could share this with his team. So we can follow up on that later if you don't want to answer right now. But there's definitely been demand to get a hold of the slides if you're open to sharing that.
Yeah, I got to take it on a case-by-case basis. I don't know who's asking for what.
Sure. We'll help.
People can feel free to contact me.
Sounds good. Fair enough. Okay, so I have a couple of my own questions, but let's just jump into the questions that are coming from the chat. Is the U.S. intelligence community aware of the deep inroads made by the MSS into South Korea? It is already affecting the U.S.-Korean alliance, and that's a question from Ron, one of our members.
Yeah, so that's sort of a U.S. intelligence question more than it is a Chinese intelligence question. So I'll beg off that. However, yes is the most probable answer. I mean, these people aren't stupid. They have an understanding of what's going on. There's an extraordinary trade relationship between South Korea and China. So that plays into this as well. It's a very complex situation.
All right. And Ron asks, oh, nope, that was the same question we just did. Don't need to do that again. Randy Newham, local professor, member of the board here of the council. How likely is a Chinese attack on Taiwan? Can the U.S. successfully defend them?
Well, they're still not there yet in capability to seize Taiwan, and it depends what you mean by attack. If can they blockade it? Yeah, sure, probably. So those types of issues, how much they'll turn up the pressure against Taiwan is open to question. But what is very clear is that they are far more likely and capable of doing that now than they were 10 years ago. Is the U.S. going to defend it? We have literally a stated policy of strategic ambiguity. And the reason we have that policy is so that China doesn't know, whether we, can't make the calculus as to whether the United States will actually move in to defend it. I sort of think we might. We'll definitely take action. The world will take action. And the question is, can the CCP survive the action that the world is going to take against it, whether or not it's military?
All right, we're going to keep hammering through these. Michael asks, what similar effort does the U.S. undertake?
You mean as far as espionage goes?
I'm guessing that's what he meant, yes.
Yeah.
You want to put that all out there for us?
Next question. Sorry, Mike. Really?
How beneficial is how beneficial is this intellectual theft to the China economy? Question from Dave.
Yeah, at a minimum, it's 8% of the Chinese economy. So that's the minimum standard that's been applied to it. It's interesting, and if you think of all the fake, I mean, I'm just talking about straight production things. Forget about the vaccines and the GMO corn seeds and all those types of things that are done to develop China internally. If you just look at what they export from intellectual property, I mean, it comes into the hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars every year globally, over $1 trillion every year globally. So, so it's a strong benefit to the Chinese economy, and some percentage of that, some large percentage of that would have benefited our economy. But it doesn't now because, whether it's auto parts or airplane parts, you don't know what you're getting from China, but they are ripoffs of U.S., a U.S. production, U.S. intellectual property, and that can be kind of complex and all sorts of machinery and things like that. So it's a huge hit to the U.S. economy.
And I assume not all of that 8% is coming from espionage efforts against the United States. Is there a way to break that down a little further?
So it's global, right? The intellectual property theft for that is global, and the rate of 8%, which transfers to somewhere between 2 to 3 million American jobs, is done to say how much of China's economy is based on intellectual property theft. And I mean, for anyone who's been in China, I mean, they have 5-story department store malls, which are all completely 100% fake products. It's pervasive. You go down the streets in Shanghai or Beijing or any places, and just out of these little garages in the back of them, like storage sheds, you'll see people putting fake Heineken labels on bottles, or putting, I mean, 45% of the beer in China is considered fake beer, is thing, which is to me a particularly great offense when they start faking beer, Heineken. So it's pervasive in Chinese society, and 8% is an absolute minimum.
So maybe tangential to that, not directly espionage related, but you hear a lot about cybercrime contributing, for example, to the Russian economy. Do we see the same kind of industry capitalization of cybercrime in China?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, that's what I meant to imply in those first series of charts of doing the categories. You see it, not only is it added into the Chinese industry, into China's economy, but unlike Russia or any other place on the planet, there is this incredibly efficient, orchestrated process for bringing in stolen technology, stolen products, or just purchased products that are taken over into China, and taking those and actually reverse engineering them, putting them through national technology centers, and I mean hundreds of them, with 600 entities overseas collecting these types of technologies, and taking those and putting them into an integrated system in China, business-to-business relationships, so that they can be developed and produced in China and then exported. It's an absolute machine to do that.
And is that part of the industry? That's cybercrime part of the industry included in that 8%, or is that then
Absolutely.
another block on top?
Well, it's absolutely in that, but we're just talking about now commercial cybercrime, right? So when they're attempting to steal turbine engines, the turbine processes for creating turbine engines from GE, which they did through a combination of cyber and human assets. There's a commercial application for that. There's also a military application for that. So we see it happening on both areas. And it just depends which technology you're doing as to where it sits in that system. But yes, we do see that.
All right, we're approaching 1 o'clock. We still got a good bit of our audience still online. Was you okay for a few more minutes?
Absolutely. Let's roll.
All right. So I guess to stick with the cybercrime topic, Charles asked, we've heard a great deal about Russian cyber espionage. How does China compare? I think even coming through this recent election cycle, we were a little bit redirected towards looking at China from focusing on Russia. What's the relationship there?
Well, I don't think there's a relationship in service to service in that regard, because China vehemently denies to the world that they're involved with it. But China, Russia's is very calculated, very identifiable organizations that are involved with it. China's scale is massive, and it's not just against the United States, it's everywhere. And it's not just against US government, it's against US industry, it's against state governments. We've seen them attacking Alaska, Arizona, other places, just because trade is done between state governments sometimes, or state agencies, and China. So it is really done on a massive scale from the PRC. It's Russian espionage by far is far more targeted and far more specific in what they're looking for.
All right, I'm trying to keep up with the questions here. They're still coming in. I'll just mention to James, willing to share the database with the government organization. Not totally sure what that question is, but I'm guessing it's one of these cases. We'll just contact Nick directly to see if that's something that he's open to or even makes sense.
My guess is probably not. I already talked to a lot of government organizations, but
they've got your information.
Well, no, it's just I put 6, 7, 8 years of my life into developing this database, and now, hey, would you mind sharing that?
Turn that
Okay,
over.
well, yeah, I appreciate the interest, but I do work a lot with government agencies with that data.
Sounds good. Jeffrey asks, can we assume that every document we send to China is being read by the CCP?
No, but you can assume that anything of interest is read, right? And that's where the artificial intelligence comes in. The ability to look in documents and to correlate what might be of interest and to pick up words and things like that and say, hey, wait a minute, this bin of information is of interest to us. So I think you'll find that in the emails that go abroad, they've had a very, very aggressive and extensive capability in screening those. So they just screen for topics of information that are interesting to them.
And so what about like postal mail? Would we expect that a lot of that's going to get opened on its way through, or could potentially make it through?
Yeah. In fact, I had tracked that for many years. They do have a very aggressive, and it's not unusual to get your mail slit open, right? That used to happen all the time for my protection, I was told. So you get, and that happens absolutely all the time. They do put a massive effort towards doing it. Someone who actually was in that department in the Ministry of Post and Telecommunications told me once that he won't touch the stuff with an eagle on it because it scares the death out of him. It's in Chinese culture. It's a very, I guess, frightening thing not to touch. So, but it's pretty pervasive. So, and they get what they can.
William asks, what are some unanticipated challenges that have emerged in the past few years regarding China's espionage?
Well, certainly the volume of it is probably the biggest unanticipated challenge. The legal structure, the fact that the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which is where we get a lot of people on what they call espionage light, for covertly acting on behalf of the Chinese government, that has to physically be done in the United States, in order to use that statute to investigate or arrest. That's a function of Nazi propaganda pre-World War II, right? So these laws haven't been updated for a modern society. So I would say that's probably the biggest challenge. Unanticipated challenges also include the lack of our law enforcement's ability to understand the technology. I mean, as you saw, I did a lot of years in the space business, so you get to understanding that. But regular, special agents, federal agents don't understand the technology. They often don't know what they're dealing with. So that's an unanticipated challenge and an area that we're going to have to work to resolve.
All right, and I think we're slowing down on the questions, so we'll try to get through these. If there are any last ones people want to slip in, probably can get under the wire. Dave comments, to us, this looks flat out criminal. Does the Chinese culture look at it differently?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Dave, I could do an entire, I do an entire day for the U.S. government on that, on just at on the culture and how Chinese culture sees it dramatically different. It stems back to Confucianism and the way they look at sort of legal environments. We look at it a very different way. For us, as a contract, that's a legal thing, and we expect everyone to abide by it with the law. Not so in China. Doesn't mean anything. A Chinese dissident attorney once said, China has lots of laws. What it lacks is the rule of law. And it does. It's just a CCP-driven thing. Laws are just used to attack opponents and to advance the interest of the Communist Party and its specific members. So Chinese society, they're very used to that. What we call corruption is not corruption in China. It's just life. So of course, when I arrested someone once and I was explaining to him in Chinese that he was going to jail, and he's asking whose house we go to. And I said, no, it's in Chinese. I'm telling him in Chinese, right now you're going to jail. And he said, yeah, I know, but whose house? Who are we talking to? And I'm explaining this to the agents, which are hysterical at this point. But the guy actually thought we were going to some place where he could pay the traditional bribe and get out of what was going on. That's just the difference in mentality on how they approach it.
And that I think similar dynamic exists in a lot of parts of the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Not necessarily unique to China. I don't know. I'd say maybe to our credit, we have law and order to the point that we don't see that's not as commonplace here in the United States. So I take that.
Right, or even when it is, we know we define it as a criminal behavior. In China, there's a saying, 能骗就骗, which is if you can cheat and get away with it, then cheat. So, I mean, and that's really kind of a code that they live by.
All right. Bob asks, does Biden family Chinese business connections compromise Biden presidency governance?
Wow, a bird just flew into my window. Amazing. I don't think so. It's certainly an area of concern, but I don't think so. No one compromises the presidency for, for a couple of $1 million here and there. So I don't think that'll be the case. I worry more about, how U.S. policy is going to move forward with China, because to be honest, historically, it hasn't been very good. I mean, we let the situation get this bad over 30 years. When I testified in front of the Congress in 1990s, and specifically on Chinese commercial espionage, I told them, fix this now, because if you don't, you'll be calling me back in 20 years, screaming, my God, how did it get this bad? Well, here we are 25 years later, and it's a heck of a lot worse than it ever got. So we've had successive failures in Democrat and Republican administrations on China policy. I don't know what the future will behold. I suspect it's going to be more of the same of what it was previously.
Question from Saul here, right on the presentation with us. He mentions that he's got friends. Let me see if I can find exactly what he said. Good friend in China who's a high school principal. Son and daughter are in law, PhDs respectively from Stanford and Yale. Now here in the U.S., how likely are they to be pressured to participate in Chinese espionage?
Well, if they have access to anyone or anything the Chinese government wants, then they have no options. I mean, and I can do a couple of hours on Chinese law that has been passed that obligates citizens, companies, foreign or Chinese, or enterprises to participate in Chinese intelligence activities. In law, people, and they threaten severe consequences for not complying with the law. And I see this all the time. That people, their families are called up, their family members call them and say, we've had a couple of government agents here. Why aren't you helping them? This is scary for us. Those types of things happens all the time. So if they have access to something that the Chinese government wants, they'll either give it to them or say, oh, I'm trying, but I can't get it. No one will get it and try and avoid it and dodge it and get out of the way. But non-compliance, saying, no, I'm not cooperating with you, is the only option that's not on the table.
So it sounds like we put that in the likely category then, to face that pressure. Brian asks, in an era of great power competition, are there any areas where we can cooperate with China? Sure.
Tons of areas. I mean, cooperation requires, let's just, I mean, it might be, the Chinese have a term in harmony, right? And it comes from one of their philosophers, Lao Tzu. And it means harmony, they expect are going to have up and downs, you're going to have thunderstorms and earthquakes, and all that is a part of the quote, the Tao, the natural way, right? So they expect that they're going to be ups and downs and problems and things that occur. And the deal is that we need to work through those areas, right? Trade being one. I mean, you can work with intellectual property theft. Sooner or later, the enforcement of it, the change of law, the foreign policy, working with allies brings China into compliance, or should bring China into compliance. But it takes a very aggressive foreign policy, domestic policy, and it takes a lot of strength in working with China. You really have to sort of get up in their face and say, guys, we can't do this. Everybody else is in agreement. You have got to stop doing this. And you have to empower elements in their society to stop it. And our idea of equality doesn't exist in China. The first thing you establish in a relationship is with that person's above you or below you. American equality doesn't exist in that society. So you have to work with them in that regard. and understanding how they view you and how you view them, and take specific issues, whether it's geopolitical issues, whether it's trade issues, whether it's technology issues, research issues, and work with them individually and specifically, leveraging your allies and trying to get to a better state. But yes, is the answer to your question.
All right. Bradley asks, in the context of to the extent that COVID affects supply chains that lead back to China, do we expect that to be a large enough financial impact that it could disrupt spending on espionage? Or is this just high enough a priority that that's going to get budget no matter what?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
I think he's asking if the money that's currently coming, the money that's going to stop coming in, the financial negative financial impact from on all economies from COVID, do we expect that would trickle into their espionage spending in any way, or they'll just maintain those spending levels?
No, well, we'll see in the 14th Party Congress when the results come out. But I suspect it's not going to be an impact to them in that regard. Espionage is cheap. I mean, it's very cheap. You know, you get, I mean, in some cases, they have $500 million worth of market share that they have in getting one drug, or more than the multi-billion-dollar benefits from stealing one thing. So, I mean, so what? You throw 50, 100, 200,000, $1 million at it, doesn't matter. It's cost effective for the entire economy. So I don't think anything's going to slow that down. Supply chain is a whole other issue. The U.S. is moving to separate its supply chain a bit, parts of its supply chain from China. In fact, I was just on a DHS study. We released a study on that. Look up Homeland Security Advisory Committee and the Economic Subcommittee. Literally a couple of weeks ago, we released a study on that. So we'll be attempting to move away from some parts of the supply chain with China that reach into our critical infrastructure or our military industrial base. And China's moving away as well. China has, and this has been long planned by China, that they wanted to develop their domestic economy to the point that they don't have to rely on the West. So in those areas, they are making attempts to move away from Western economic entanglement and reliance as well.
All right, we're winding down here. We'll get these last couple of questions in. Thomas asks, how is the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative depending on intelligence gathering, and how will their success impact U.S. competitiveness in the future?
Thomas, I'll actually tell you that's a great question, but it is way too big of an issue to discuss here. You know what? Hit me offline. I'm happy to give you some thoughts on that. But there's a significant intelligence gathering component to it, not for depending, but the Safe Cities program and the safe policing programs that China has put into place in dozens and dozens of countries. Much of that data goes back to China for analysis, right? So it goes back into servers in Chinese government. And of course they say, no, we don't look at it. But so the intelligence is on a massive scale on their collection, right? Within those countries. And that's all the video types of collections, facial recognition, Gantt recognition, things like that, individual identity recognition, all those things. In addition, China has set up massive programs for training foreign intelligence and foreign police agencies. So all those Belt and Road initiatives, many of them have components of China. I think it's Uzbekistan. They have a training facility as well as in Beijing. So they bring people out and do a lot of training, building the intelligence sharing relationships with those countries. And then lastly, they have the Ministry of Public Security throughout the entire Belt and Road Initiative under its counterterrorism authorities, using all the security apparatus, the Chinese private security companies, for collection as well. So it's, I guess I just answered the question. It's a massive collection component. The Belt and Road Initiative has been successful. I wouldn't call it wildly successful. And about U.S. competitiveness, does it impact us? Yes. Has the U.S. been extremely competitive in giving and working in those countries? Not really. In fact, I've spoken to some leadership in those countries, and they turn around and say, you know what, Nick, it's not like you guys ever helped us out. So the U.S. is trying to move towards export and being more competitive about this now, and there are a lot of efforts underway in the Department of Commerce, the Department of State, and even Defense Department. to be able to move U.S. product and U.S. forces capability and out into countries that are in the BRI initiative. But the only place we're competitive at all, in fact, we dominate, is security assistance programs. Everything else is China.
All right, our members kept us going here. We're going to just wind down here. A couple of quick and easy questions. I really appreciate you taking the time to present to us today. A lot of value, a lot of solid information here. We pushed right up to the last minute. In fact, we may still go just a tiny bit over. I guess I'm curious, does in all your research, does any specific case stand out to you as highly unusual or interesting, or really just something about it always sticks out to you?
There are a couple of cases that, some are far more in depth. Subin, who, worked for years and worked with a contractor group for, in conducting cyber and acted almost as an insider. Things like that are sort of unusual cases that you look at. Most of them, to be honest, sort of meld together after a while. But trends are what I think I noticed more than anything. So by and large, the average person committing economic espionage, for example, which I was surprised, is probably a male in their late 40s. And that's only because a few young cases really throw off the stats. But, that mean age is way up there, close to 50. In many, many cases, it's well over 50. And so you start to look at the theft from U.S. companies, which occurs, people, will work for decades. And I've timed, when the theft comes, and people work for decades, and then they steal and go back to China. So it's almost like a retirement program. So things like that really start to strike you after a while. I have dozens of sort of examples like that of insider threat indicators that really come to prominence. Aggregating the data and taking a look at and sort of squeezing it, see what comes out.
All right, and Haley's gonna gave us an opportunity early on. We'll wrap it up with this. So you have a chance for a quick plug. Haley asks, when can we expect your next volume on Chinese espionage to be released?
The one, because I just released one a couple of months ago. So you're talking about one more current than that?
I don't know what she meant behind the question, but I think now's your opportunity to plug whatever you want.
Okay. So I had my book, and a lot of people have been after me and I've published articles here and there over the years, and mostly because I did a lot of overseas time. So I didn't do a lot of articles at different points in my career. But now, since having retired, I have been putting out a fair amount of paper. I started putting out a series on Chinese espionage. And the reason is just because the way the data is structured, I can organize it a lot better. If I'm looking at all economic espionage or actions against Taiwan or against the aerospace industry. So these are volumes that I've put out, the most recent of which was, I think, October. And it's just the first one that looks at their operations and tactics and explains in a lot more depth what we've gone through today, but again, in a lot more depth. It's only 56 pages long. But on my website, which I'll give to you, you can distribute shinobyenterprises.com. On that, I've put I put lectures on, everything's, all the free stuff. I put my articles, any papers that I've written, I put links to them. So it's sort of a one-stop shop if you really want to explore Chinese espionage. There are a few dozen things like articles, papers, videos that you can watch, in that one place. So that might be helpful. To answer your question, I expect within the next 30 days, I'm hoping to get my next volume out.
All right. So well on track. Appreciate you joining today. Great conversation. I really enjoyed the chance to meet you and welcome back to the organization. I'm going to bring Saul in to just help us kind of close things out here.
I think we've already said it. And obviously, Nick, with the questions that came in, particularly on Q&A, great interest, and you're very articulate as we get into those questions and the great overview that you gave us. So thanks for your service to our country, Nick, and thanks for your continued service. And again, thank you for presenting to us today.
Thanks very much. I enjoyed the opportunity. I hope it was beneficial.